My name is JJ Simon. I live in Delmar, Delaware. I'm a bladesmith primarily. I do some blacksmithing, but I'm a cutler. I'm a journeyman in the American Bladesmith Society. I've been smithing 14 years. I tattoo professionally. That's my actual job. And this is my shop. Smithing is from a technical standpoint, is the process of using heat and force to move material. Blacksmithing or bladesmithing there's smithing they have tinsmiths and they have silversmiths and they have goldsmiths, and sometimes you may use heat, but sometimes the material is soft enough that you can move it without using heat to put it in a plastic state. Blacksmithing, generally everything is done with heat. You may do some adjustments, moving things, taking kinks out of stuff, that kind of stuff cold, but most of the process is done with heat. So you have blacksmithing and then you have what's called whitesmithing. So in blacksmithing are forged pieces that are left basically scrubbed with a wire brush and then hit with some sort of an oil or a wax and left in that blackened state. But there are parts that are hand worked, that are hand filed or hand stoned, and that's white working. And there's all kinds of decorative work that goes with that. That is an extension of blacksmithing. It's a refinement and a level of finishing that's really beautiful. Well, the way that I got started is when I was a little boy, I wanted to make swords and I was fascinated with it. And I actually dug a forge into my yard, but I didn't know that you had to have an air source. I was very young. But I did manage to get some steel hot and beat on it with a hammer on a rock or something. And like I said before, professionally I'm a tattoo artist, and I had bought a tattoo shop in town and had managed to pay it off before the 2008 recession, and I was like, I'm gonna do something nice for myself. I've reached a level of success. What do I want to do? And I decided that I wanted to make swords. So at that time, there wasn't a lot of information on available on how to go about doing that. I don't think I went there first, but I had learned about Furnace Town. But I found a course on Japanese blade making in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. And I went and I did a week at this blacksmith shop up there. And the instructor's name was Mutzer Yi. And Mutzer was trained by a guy named Michael Bell, who was trained in Japan as a smith. And Mutzer was his apprentice for 5 years. And I stayed in touch with him, and he said, you should look for a local guild. So I found one, and I started going to Furnace Town and doing some forging there. And I really didn't know that they were putting on classes and things like that. But they do, and they have a hammer-in once a year. If you want to make knives, take a blacksmithing class, because learning to blacksmith will make you a better smith. Bladesmiths are really moving a flat piece of stock kind of in 2 dimensions. They don't really think 3-dimensionally. But when you see a blacksmith move material, you understand what it is to actually be a blacksmith. When they do what they're doing, it's amazing. The way that I was trained is the basics to blacksmithing. There's a handful of basics. So there's learning how to draw a taper, a point, from square bar or round bar. There's learning how to forge square to round or round to square. There's learning how to make scrolls. There's learning how to make counter scrolls. There's learning how to twist parts. And there's learning how to do what they call a half face blow, which is where the hammer hits half on and half off of the anvil face, and it makes a step in the material, right? So you have to have an order of operations, and you have to know what it is that you're making. Obviously, large things like we were talking about before, making gates and those kinds of things, there's a lot of layout to that, and there's a process of deciding what size material you're starting with, how it has to be forged, if you have to do welding in the forge, which is an advanced concept. It's not something you learn in your basics. And how things are going to be joined. So for things like that, there are different types of joinery. There's welding, there are collars, there's pass-throughs, where one bar will literally be pierced, opened up, and another bar will be passed through it. Blacksmithing is the only mechanical operation where you can put a 1/4-inch hole in a 1/4-inch bar, which is really fascinating. That people figured, that humans figured out how to do that. Historical blacksmithing, you would start with iron or wrought iron. Modern blacksmithing, it's very rare to have pure iron. Nobody makes wrought iron anymore in America. There's one company in England that's producing wrought iron by resmelting old wrought iron into new bar stock. It's very expensive. Smiths do, grab wherever they can pieces of wrought iron that are taken out of bridges and, wagon wheels and things like that, and they'll repurpose them. I've got a whole, bucket full of wrought iron for certain things. And so, there was a material process from making these things, and it all started with iron ore. On the Eastern Shore, we had the Nassawango furnace, and that furnace was based on bog iron, which is a commonly used iron in what I would call historic or archaeological kind of Viking smithing, European smithing, because you could literally just find it on the ground. You didn't have to make an iron mine, right? And so on the Eastern Shore, you had this iron that gets here through a chemical and biological process where the iron ore is taken by erosion from the Western Shore. It's taken into the bay, and then like this bacteria eats it, and it basically digests it, and then when it shits it out, it makes iron ore, which then coalesces into these giant blocks of iron. The problem with it is it's really dirty ore, and the Eastern Shore's ore wasn't great, and eventually, because of that, there was better ore to be found in New Jersey, and the New Jersey furnaces put the Nassawango furnace out of business. But you had this huge blast furnace that they built so that they could process this ore. And if you go to Furnacetown and you look at the blast furnace, there's a creek that runs up to it, and they would use that creek with skiffs or whatever to move the ore in and then run it up this charging ramp and drop it down into this enormous blast furnace. I don't know if you guys have been there. Have you ever looked inside of it? So when you look up inside of it, right, it's just glass. And it's glass because of all the silica that's being burned out when they're smelting it, right? Now the iron from the Nassawango furnace couldn't be just made directly into steel because it wasn't that good. It would have to be refined. So what they did is they smelted the iron, it was poured out into pigs, right, which you've seen the molds, where they look like pigs lined up next to a mother. And then they would take that and they would refine that iron through more processes, and then eventually that would be made into iron, wrought iron or iron bar stock, and then that would be taken to a blacksmith. And then the blacksmith would figure out, I need this dimension, and I need to forge it down to this dimension or whatever. There's something really magical about it. You are using elements to control and manipulate something that you otherwise couldn't, right? And there's earth, which is the iron, right? And there's fire, and then there's oxygen that makes that fire hot enough to do what you're doing, and then there's water for cooling things, and so there's the entire physiological world is contained in this, but it's magical. There's a magical thing to it, especially in making a blade, because when you have to heat treat something to harden it, it can die in the process. And so you're giving it its life when you heat treat and you do it the right way. And that's what makes a knife, or a scissor, or an axe, or a scythe, a scythe. Because without that, it's just a knife-shaped object or an axe-shaped object. It's never going to hold an edge. It's never going to do the job that it's supposed to do. And it's really fun, and it's really hard, but it's really rewarding.